The house I grew up in was about 100 years old by the time my parents bought it. I lived there until I was 16. For as long as I can remember, I saw what I described as a girl that was pink and see-through. I always called her Pam. It's been 10 years since I lived in that house, and I still remember her vividly. My dad got a bit weirded out when I would talk about Pam, and finally, when I was 13, my mom put me in therapy because Pam was still something I brought up regularly. In order to stop my parents from thinking I was crazy, I just stopped talking about Pam completely and went on with life. That was until my parents decided to put the house up for sale when I was 16. Just 2 weeks before moving into our new house, I was sleeping but was woken up by Pam standing in my doorway and pointing into the bathroom that was directly across the hall. All Pam said was, "Look, my mom." And when I looked to see who she was pointing at, I saw a woman hanging by a cord from the light fixture in the bathroom. I remember the woman looked as though she had been hanging there for a while, when all of a sudden the woman's boot fell off and I abruptly woke up. I ran into my parents' room to tell them what happened, and my mom looked at me disappointed because I was talking about Pam again after having kept quiet about her for years. I concluded that it was just a bad dream and went back to bed with no other incidences until a few days later. I was once again asleep and dreaming that I was woken up by crying coming from the bathroom across the hall. I got out of bed and walked over to see what was going on. At that point, I saw the same woman that was hanging from the bathroom light fixture, sobbing and holding a very real little girl under the water in the bathtub. It was then that I realized that the little girl was the little pink see-through girl I had seen my entire life. It was Pam, and she was not moving. I immediately woke up and I was crying uncontrollably. I was 16 years old and I ran into my parents' room like a 5-year-old and jumped into bed with my mom. My dad was working at the time. I told my mom what had happened, and my mom could see how upset I was and was trying to calm me down. At that same moment, the pink and transparent version of Pam walked through the door. I looked at my mom and just whispered, "Oh my God, Mom, she's in here." And I pulled the covers up to my neck and just looked at my mom terrified. My mom was speechless. At that point, Pam slowly walked up the side of the bed and began shoving me into my mom. I had never been touched by Pam before. I was screaming and crying and kept yelling, "Stop touching me!" And all that my mom could reply was, "I'm not touching you," as she was being pushed out of the other side of the bed. After what seemed like forever, Pam stopped and slowly walked out of the room. I cried myself to sleep, and my mom stayed awake to see what else would happen. I never spent another night in that house. But 2 weeks after we moved out completely, the house caught fire. The entire backside as well as the entire garage burnt. The official cause was spontaneous combustion. The house that my family lived in for 25 years has since been bought and sold 8 times within 10 years. No one wants to stay in that house, and I really think that Pam is the reason why. When I was younger, my mom was dating this guy, who we will call JB, and after a few months, he invited my mom, me, and my brother to go with him and his son, about my age, out to his lake house for the weekend. It was right on Lake Michigan, but up in a more secluded area, which was pretty awesome. Well, we got up there, and for one, I already felt really creeped out. It was a smaller 2, maybe 3 if you count the really big attic story house that had the living room, dining room / kitchen on the first floor and had 2 bedrooms on the second floor. His grandfather had helped to build the place with the grandfather's dad, and then he lived there for most of his life, working as a tailor in the nearby town. We went up to the attic to get some beach toys because that's where JB kept all of that stuff, so he didn't have to haul it every time he went out there. Well, when we went up to the attic, I noticed in the corner covered in some dust and cobwebs about 8 mannequins, some just upper torsos and some full body. Not too out of the ordinary considering a tailor had lived there. Me and JB's son slept down in the living room on the couch since there were no more beds, and near midnight-ish I heard one of the stairs squeak a few times. Figuring it was my mom coming to check to make sure we were asleep, I told his son to be quiet and quickly turned the TV off and hid under the covers. After not hearing any noise for a few minutes, I looked out from under the covers and saw 3 of the mannequins moving around in the kitchen. Like their body parts weren't moving, but they were sliding around the kitchen. I swore I was dreaming, but was so terribly frightened, I hid back under the covers with a small yelp, and then heard the dragging on the floor coming closer and peeked out, seeing one of them just a few feet from the couch. I hid back under the covers and shut my eyes tight, hoping it would go away. The next morning, I got up and tried not to think about it, really hoping it was just a bad dream. But when we went back up to the attic to put the beach stuff back, the mannequins were in different spots and weren't covered in cobwebs anymore. Don't believe me if you don't want to, but it happened, and I've been scared shitless of mannequins ever since. I used to date a girl in college who lived 3 hours away. We would trade weekends, one at her school, one at my school. One day she got upset because she had driven all the way to see to me, and I was in an all-night study session, which she had known about, and couldn't be home to see her. She texted me that she was going back to her place, and then I never heard anything from her ever again. After 3 days of texting her, trying to make sure she was okay, the text started coming back as "number not found." I sent her the stuff she'd left at my apartment in the mail, and it returned as no forwarding address. Her instant messenger account, which I never messaged but knew the name of, disconnected. And it gets weirder. I called her apartment landline and was told the people who had lived there had moved out. She had 3 roommates and didn't leave a number as to where they went. I got really freaked out and asked friends who worked in school admin to pull some strings just to make sure she was alive. The school she was at didn't have any records of her as a student. The license plate to her car wasn't registered to anyone. None of our mutual friends ever saw her again. I called the police, but there were no car accidents involving anyone who fit her description in the stretch of road between our 2 schools that night, or in the 2 weeks after. I didn't ask for a longer time frame because at that point she was already missing. Cops wouldn't file a missing person because I wasn't a family member. To this day, I have no idea what happened, why she freaked out on me so bad, or if she's still alive, or in witness protection, or was erased from all time by an evil wizard. She literally disappeared without a trace. When I was little, I would go over to my grandparents' house frequently with my sister and cousins. My grandparents have an attached mother-in-law apartment, so we always played in there while the grown-ups would talk in the main house. One day we were playing hot and cold with a little key we found in the apartment. While one person was hiding it, they accidentally dropped it and it fell under the door to the basement. I opened the door to get it, and when I did, there was a man standing at the bottom of the stairs that I didn't recognize. He had a bunch of stuff in his arms, like he had rummaged through my grandparents' basement. Keep in mind, my grandparents were hoarders. Their basement was full of stuff that they either forgot about or put in storage, some of it being relatively valuable. When he saw me, he yelled at me, "Go back upstairs, kid, go!" I was so freaked out, I bolted and immediately ran into the main house to tell my parents. My dad went into the basement to look, but couldn't find anyone. To this day, they all tell me I imagined it, but my sister and cousins insist it's real too. About 5 years later, both of my grandparents passed away, so I was helping my dad clean out their basement. Turns out they were missing a ton of stuff. I haven't gone back in that house since. Thank you for coming to Riotu's basement. Click the video on screen to find out what lies in the attic, and don't forget to subscribe.